So they were willing to sacrifice everything in the way of God. Are the inventors willing to do that? Are the scientists and the philosophers and the Gnostics willing to do all of that? I think not. I really don't think so. But what about the prophets? Let me just cut to the chase here. Who do I think is the most influential figure in history? It was none other than Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. But then we have prophets, right? Jesus was definitely very influential, wasn't he? Of course he is. He's got billions of followers today. What about Moses? He was very influential. Maybe not at his time, but what about today? His followers certainly exert a great deal of influence on world politics, don't they? We all know that. We live in the West. They're very, very powerful men and women, the followers of Moses. So they were very powerful. What about our own prophet? The Bi'tha. See, the one thing that you could use to identify a turning point in history is this. A turning point in history is what alters the course of history forever. There aren't many of them out there. One of them that we could say for certain was a turning point was the Bi'tha, the revelation that was sent to our holy prophet, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. And without a doubt, that was a turning point in history. Another one is the Battle of the Trenches. And we know that that's a turning point in history because without the victory that the Muslims were able to achieve and gain during the Battle of the Trenches, Islam would have been annihilated and obliterated within a very short lifespan of its own. Which is why the Prophet said, Ilahi, when he noticed the multitudes of the idolaters and the mushrikeen who had amassed to kill the Prophet and kill everyone with him, the Prophet raised his hands towards the sky and said, Ilahi, in shi'ta an la tu'bad falan tu'bad. If you don't want to be worshipped, you'll never be worshipped. In other words, if you allow us to be killed today, you will never be worshipped. And of course, we all know the story. The commander of the faithful faces a man by the name of Amr ibn Wudd al-Amiri, who was labeled, entitled Farisu Yalyal. Yalyal was one of the battles which was very well known back in the pre-Islamic pagan era. And what happened was that Amr ibn Wudd faced an army of 1,000 men, and he killed them all, which is why he was known to equal 1,000 men. And the commander of the faithful faced him. Of course, there were other people that the Imam faced who were of equal power and equal strength. The other was Marhab, and the other was the man that the Imam faced during the battle, if you remember, Battle of Siffin. There was a man who was also said to equal 1,000 men. And when he saw the Imam, he didn't see the Imam in the Battle of Siffin. He didn't see the Imam worthy of facing him. He didn't want to kill the Imam himself. He thought he was too powerful to do it. And so what he did was he sent his youngest son, in a gesture of trying to humiliate the Imam. I'm not going to be the one to kill you. It's going to be my younger son. So he sends that son. The Imam sends him back in a body bag. He sends the second son. He gets killed. He sends the third son. He gets killed by the Imam. And so eventually he goes out in the battlefield, faces the commander of the faithful, and the Imam kills him as well. And he was also known to equal 1,000 men. So that was a turning point in history, which is why the Prophet said, ضَرْبَةُ عَلِيٍّ يَوْمَ الْخَنْدَقِ أَفْضَلْ مِنْ عِبَادَةِ الثَّقَلَيْنِ. The strike of Ali ibn Abi Talib, the strike of that sword, which eventually led to the Muslims becoming the victors in the battle, is greater and weightier than the worship of the Thaqalain, the human beings as well as the jinn. So that was a turning point in history. What else? When we talk about Imam Hussein, and we talk about the Battle of Karbala, and we talk about the movement and the revolution that he embarked on, and we say that this was by far the most influential event in the history of mankind, we're not, God forbid, demeaning the position of the Prophet. What we're saying is this. Had it not been for Imam al-Hussein, and I'm sure you've all heard this before, I'll try to expand on it a little bit. Had it not been for Imam al-Hussein, we would not all be here tonight listening about the virtues of the prophets and the imams and the men of God. We wouldn't be Muslims to begin with. Why? Let me give you a few examples. Muhammad Abdu was the dean of the Al-Azhar University, one of the most respected scholastic figures in the Islamic world. He has written books. One book is an interpretation or a commentary on Nahj al-Balagha. And he's written other books about the history of Islam. And in one of his books, he states that Banu Umayyah were trying to destroy the very core of this religion. Banu Umayyah, unlike what other people that follow other Islamic denominations think or are fooled and conceived they look at Bani Umayyah as people who were misguided, but at the same time they had pure intentions. Muhammad Abdu says that's not true. And this is very important coming from a man of this caliber. Do you know what they did? Marwan ibn Abdul Malik, Marwan ibn al-Hakam, excuse me. On one occasion, Muawiyah decides to sack him. He does something, Muawiyah gets displeased with him, he wants to get rid of him. So what he does, in order to win back the heart of Muawiyah, he gathers a few of his compadres and a few of his supporters, and he enters upon the majlis of Muawiyah. As soon as they enter, he looks at Muawiyah and addresses him with this title. He says, Assalamu alayka ya Rasulallah. Muawiyah is very pleased. Well, that's something I'd like to hear. So he decides to keep Marwan ibn al-Hakam. And it was after that that Marwan ibn al-Hakam, in a process of trying to engage in what we refer to as bootlicking, he came to Muawiyah and said, listen, I got a suggestion for you. I think you're going to like this. I suggest that you appoint your son Yazid as the Khalifa after you, as the ruler after your departure. Just make damn sure that this man, Amr ibn al-As, he doesn't take over. I think that you are so great, and that Abu Sufyan, your father, was so great, and that your mother Hind was so chaste and so noble and so honorable, that the rulership of the Muslim Ummah needs to stay within this pure family. So you make sure that your son, who's sitting over there sleeping with monkeys and drinking alcohol and doing the every filthy sin in the book, you make sure he's the king after you. And Muawiyah took him up for that suggestion. Muawiyah, sure enough, appointed Yazid as his successor. So that's one example. People were walking into these majalis addressing Muawiyah as Rasulullah. What religion are we talking about? Had it not been for Imam al-Hussein, Islam would have been non-existent. What else? You had Abdul Malik ibn Marwan had a son, Al-Walid ibn Abdul Malik. Al-Walid, one day, having been fed up with the disgusting acts of transgression and filthy vice that he was occupied with 24/7, one day he got bored. He said, well, I've drank every single intoxicant there is to drink, and I've engaged in every